The dust hung thick in the afternoon air, coating everything in Dry Creek with a fine layer of grit. The town square, if one could call the patch of trampled earth between the general store and the saloon a square, was more crowded than usual. Men in worn leather chaps and sweat-stained hats gathered in clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves of heat off the parched ground. Women in calico dresses stood at the edges, some with children clutching at their skirts, all drawn by the same grim spectacle. At the center of it all stood Sheriff McKenna, his badge catching the harsh sunlight. Beside him, chained like an animal, was a man whose very presence seemed to command both fear and fascination from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin bronzed by sun and heritage. He stood with a dignity that no amount of iron could diminish. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and though his wrists were bound with rusted shackles that had carved raw grooves into his flesh, he held his head high. "Step right up, folks," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying the authority of law and the showmanship of a carnival barker. "Got ourselves a genuine wild one here. Caught him stealing horses from the Matheson Ranch. Judge says he's to be sold to cover the damages." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. "Savage," someone spat. "Beast," another added. The words flew like stones, but the man in chains never flinched. His dark eyes swept over the crowd with a calm that seemed to unsettle them more than any show of rage would have. $50 to start," McKenna announced. "Who'll give me 50 for this strong back? Put him to work in the mines or breaking horses. Lord knows these savages are good with animals." From the back of the crowd, a voice rose clear and sharp as a rifle crack. "Don't hurt him!" Heads turned as one. Through the parting crowd came a woman in a faded brown dress that had seen too many washings. Clara Whitford's auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes blazed with a fire that made strong men step aside. She was known in Dry Creek as the Widow Whitford, who lived alone on a failing ranch at the edge of town, too proud to remarry and too stubborn to sell. "I'll buy him," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff McKenna's mustache twitched with barely concealed amusement. "Now, Mrs. Whitford, this ain't no church charity case. This here's a dangerous—" "I said I'll buy him." Clara reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a small cloth bundle. The coins inside clinked softly as she held it up. "Here's $70. Everything I have." The crowd erupted. "Clara, have you lost your mind?" Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, gasped. "You can't bring that creature onto your property." "He's a thief!" someone else shouted. "A savage!" Clara's jaw set like granite. "Call him savage all you want," she said, her eyes never leaving the chained man's face. "I see a man worth saving." For the first time, something flickered in the prisoner's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper that had been buried beneath years of harsh treatment. McKenna looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mrs. Whitford, I got a responsibility to this town. You have a responsibility to the law," Clara interrupted. "The judge said he was to be sold. I'm buying, unless you're telling me my money's no good because I'm a woman." That struck a nerve. The sheriff's face reddened, but he couldn't argue with her logic. In a town where law was still finding its footing, even he couldn't openly discriminate against a widow's legal tender. "Fine," he growled. Snatching the bundle from her hand, he counted the coins with exaggerated care, clearly hoping to find her short. When the count came up true, his scowl deepened. "Bill of sale will be at my office. You can collect it, and him, in an hour." Clara nodded curtly. "I'll take him now. Now see here. I've paid for him. He's my property now. As you so crudely put it, I'll take him now. Or you can explain to Judge Harrison why you held on to him after the sale was complete." The threat of involving the circuit judge, who was known for his strict adherence to the letter of the law, made McKenna's protest die in his throat. With visible reluctance, he produced a key and unlocked the shackles around the man's ankles, though he left the wrist restraints in place. "The rest come off when I get the bill of sale." Clara said firmly. She turned to the man and, in a voice gentler than any he'd likely heard in months, said, "Come with me." The man studied her for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then, with a dignity that made the crowd's earlier jeers seem even more shameful, he inclined his head slightly and stepped forward. As Clara led him through the crowd, the townspeople parted like the Red Sea, but their faces showed none of Moses's reverence. Disgust, shock, and moral outrage painted their features in broad strokes. "You'll regret this, Clara, missus," Patterson called after them. "Mark my words." Clara didn't turn around. "The only thing I'd regret," she said, loud enough for all to hear, "is standing by while you all treat a human being like livestock." Old Samuel Turner, the blacksmith, shook his grizzled head. "That woman's gonna get herself killed," he muttered. "Them savages can't be civilized. It's not in their nature." But young Tom Bradley, the doctor's son, watched the pair disappear down the dusty street with thoughtful eyes. "Maybe," he said quietly. "It's our nature that needs civilizing." His father cuffed him sharply on the ear. "Don't let me hear such talk from you again, boy. That kind of thinking will see you run out of town, or worse." As Clara and the man walked toward the sheriff's office, she could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a yoke. But she'd borne heavier burdens: the loss of her husband, the struggle to keep the ranch afloat, the pitying looks that had followed her for 3 years. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She glanced sideways at the man walking beside her, despite the chains. He moved with a fluid grace that spoke of strength held in check. His face, now that she could see it clearly, was weathered but not old, marked by hardship but not broken by it. "I'm Clara," she said softly, not expecting a response. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw intelligence in those dark eyes, along with a wariness born of hard experience. They reached the sheriff's office, a squat building that served as both jail and administrative center. Clara pushed open the door, the man following silently. McKenna was already there, scratching out the bill of sale with obvious reluctance. "You sure about this, Mrs. Whitford?" he asked one last time. "It ain't too late to change your mind. I could find another buyer, maybe someone better equipped to handle—" "Just write the bill, Sheriff." McKenna sighed and completed the document, stamping it with more force than necessary. "There. May the Lord help you, because you surely ain't helping yourself." Clara took the paper and folded it carefully. "The keys, Sheriff." With a disgusted snort, McKenna tossed her the key to the wrist shackles. "Don't come crying to me when he slits your throat in your sleep." Clara's eyes flashed dangerously. "The only throat that's been cut in this town lately was by Bob Harmon when he was drunk, and he's as white as fresh cotton. Good day, Sheriff." She turned and walked out, her purchased man following. Once outside, she stopped and faced him. "I'm going to unlock these now," she said, holding up the key. "I don't expect you'll run. Where would you go? But I won't keep you in chains like an animal." She reached for his wrists, and he held them out slowly, watching her with those unreadable eyes. The key turned with a rusty protest, and the shackles fell away, hitting the wooden walkway with a dull clang that seemed to echo down the empty street. The man rubbed his raw wrists, the first truly human gesture she'd seen from him. Red welts and scabs marked where the iron had bitten deep. "We'll need to tend to those," Clara said. "I have salve at the ranch." She paused, then added, "It's about an hour's ride. Can you ride?" The ghost of something, almost a smile, touched his lips. He nodded once. "Good. The livery stable's this way." As they walked through town toward the stable, Clara held her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed in their wake. She'd crossed a line today. She knew there would be no going back to being just the widow Whitford, object of pity and casual charity. Now she was something else, something dangerous in their eyes. But as she glanced at the man walking beside her, his stride matching hers, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years. Purpose, Maybe she couldn't save her husband from the fever that took him. Maybe she couldn't save her ranch from slowly failing, but this man, this human being whom everyone else had written off as a savage, maybe him she could save. And maybe, though she didn't dare think it yet, he might save her too. The ranch appeared as they crested the final hill, and Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Even in the golden light of late afternoon, there was no hiding what the Whitford place had become. The main house listed slightly to the east, its unpainted boards weathered to the color of old bones. Half the fence posts along the front pasture had given up their fight with gravity, leaving gaps wide enough for cattle to wander through, if she'd had any cattle left to wander. She glanced at the man riding beside her on the old mare she'd borrowed from the livery. He surveyed the property with those dark, calculating eyes, taking in every broken board and weed-choked garden bed. Clara waited for the judgment she was sure would come, but he simply nodded, as if he'd seen worse. It wasn't always like this, she heard herself saying, then immediately wished she hadn't. What did it matter what he thought? They dismounted near the barn, or what remained of it. The structure stood, but barely, its roof patched with mismatched shingles and tar paper. Clara led the mare inside, grateful that at least this duty she could still perform properly. The man followed, and without being asked, began removing the borrowed saddle from his mount. Inside the house, Clara lit the oil lamp against the gathering dusk. The yellow light revealed a space that was clean but sparse, a table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, shelves holding a meager collection of dishes and preserves. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a single photograph in a tarnished frame. "You can sleep in the barn," she said, not meeting his eyes. "There's fresh hay in the loft, and blankets in the trunk by the door. I'll bring supper out when it's ready." She busied herself at the stove, aware of him standing motionless by the door. When she finally turned, he was looking at the photograph. Jacob stared back from the frame, frozen forever at 28, his smile confident and his eyes full of plans that would never be realized. "My husband," Clara said quietly. "Jacob, he died 3 winters ago." The man nodded slowly, then moved toward the door. Just before he left, he paused and looked back at her. His lips moved carefully, as if remembering how to form the words. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and rusty from disuse. Then he was gone, leaving Clara standing alone in her kitchen, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. Supper was simple, beans and cornbread, with the last of the preserved peaches from 2 summers ago. She carried the tray to the barn, finding him sitting on a bale of hay, working something in his hands. As she drew closer, she saw it was a piece of harness, and he was mending a broken buckle with surprising dexterity. "You don't have to," she began, but he looked up at her with something almost like amusement in his eyes. She set the tray down beside him. "Well, I suppose there's plenty needs fixing around here." They ate in companionable silence, the barn cats emerging from their hiding spots to investigate the stranger. One brave tabby even rubbed against his leg, and Clara saw his hand drop to stroke its head with unexpected gentleness. That night, she lay awake listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the old house, but underneath those sounds was something new, the knowledge that she wasn't alone on the ranch for the first time in 3 years. It should have frightened her, she supposed. Everyone in town certainly expected her to be frightened. Instead, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not peace, exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. Morning came with a list of necessities. Clara stood in her kitchen, pencil in hand, trying to prioritize repairs that all seemed equally urgent. The roof leaked in 3 places. The well pump needed new leather washers. The chicken coop had a hole that let in foxes. The garden fence couldn't keep out rabbits. And underlying it all was the constant need for money she didn't have. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The man stood on her porch, his hair tied back, wearing the same clothes from yesterday but somehow looking more settled. He gestured toward the barn, then at himself, then made a motion like swinging a hammer. You want to work? Clara asked. He nodded. I can't pay you. You understand that, don't you? I spent everything I had just to... She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. I mean, food and shelter. That's all I can offer. He held up his hands, showing her the welts from the shackles, now cleaned but still angry-looking. Then he pointed to the house, to her, and nodded again. The message was clear. She had freed him. That was payment enough. Clara found herself blinking back sudden tears. Well then, I suppose we'd better get started. She showed him the tool shed, Jacob's tools still hanging in their places, gathering dust and rust. He examined each one carefully, testing edges and joints, setting aside those that needed repair. When he found Jacob's whetstone, he looked at her questioningly. Yes, of course, whatever you need to use. The words came out choked. By midday, the rhythmic sound of hammer on wood filled the air. Clara went about her own chores, feeding the chickens, tending the vegetable garden, but her attention kept drifting to where he worked. He'd started with the fence, and already a section that had been leaning drunkenly was standing straight and true. When she brought him water, he drank deeply, then surprised her by speaking again. Good tools, he said, nodding toward the shed. Your man, new iron. Jacob was particular about his tools. Clara managed. Said a man was only as good as what he worked with. The stranger considered this, then nodded approvingly. Wise. That evening, as they ate another simple meal, this time at the kitchen table, Clara having insisted, she found herself talking about Jacob, about the ranch, about her family back east who'd written her off when she'd refused to return after the funeral. They couldn't understand, she said, pushing beans around her plate. This was our dream, Jacob's and mine. We were going to raise horses, maybe some cattle, build something that would last. She laughed bitterly. Instead, I've watched it fall apart, piece by piece. The bank owns more of it than I do now. The man listened without comment, but his attention never wavered. When she finally ran out of words, he stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening land. After a long moment, he spoke. Land remembers, he said slowly. Bad times, good times, but land waits, for hands that know, for hearts that stay. Clara stared at him. It was the longest speech she'd heard from him, and the wisdom in it made her throat tight. Days turned into a week, then two. A routine emerged. He would work from sunrise to sunset, fixing, mending, rebuilding. She would keep house, tend the garden, and gradually, tentatively, begin to plan beyond the next meal. In the evenings, they would eat together, and sometimes he would speak, never much, but each word seemed carefully chosen and worth the silence that surrounded it. She learned his name the day he fixed the well pump, as clear water gushed forth for the first time in months. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Samuel, he said, pointing to himself. Samuel Tallbear. Samuel, she repeated, and his smile widened at hearing his name spoken kindly. The town, of course, watched and whispered. When Clara went to Bradley's store for supplies, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women she'd known for years crossed the street to avoid her. Only young Tom Bradley would meet her eyes, and he always added an extra apple or two to her purchases when his father wasn't looking. They're saying things. Tom warned her one day, glancing around nervously. Ugly things, about you and him. Clara's chin lifted. Let them say what they will. I know the truth. Just be careful. Mrs. Whitford, some of the men, they're talking about riding out to your place, making sure you're safe. The implications in that pause made Clara's blood run cold, but she kept her voice steady. You tell those men that I'm safer now than I've been in 3 years, and if they set foot on my property without invitation, they'll be met with Jacob's shotgun. But that night, she did retrieve the shotgun from its place above the mantel, cleaning and loading it with hands that trembled only slightly. When Samuel saw it leaning by the door the next morning, he nodded grimly. He understood the danger she'd put herself in by taking him in. That day, he worked closer to the house, and she noticed he'd taken to wearing a hammer on his belt even when he wasn't using it. The first test came sooner than expected. Clara was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. 3, maybe 4 riders. Her hands tightened on the hoe, but she forced herself to keep working, not looking up even when the horses stopped at her gate. Clara Whitford. The voice belonged to Dale Morrison, owner of the largest ranch in the valley and a man who'd made no secret of his interest in acquiring her land. "We've come to check on your welfare." Clara straightened slowly, taking in the men arrayed before her. Morrison, of course, with his cold eyes and expensive hat. Beside him, the Harmon brothers, mean drunks, both of them, and Sheriff McKenna, looking uncomfortable but present nonetheless. "As you can see, Mr. Morrison, I'm perfectly well." She kept her voice level, though her heart raced. "Now, Clara." Morrison dismounted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "You can't blame folks for being concerned. A woman alone, with a savage. His name is Samuel." The words came out sharp as shattered glass. "And I'm not alone, as you've just pointed out." Morrison's face darkened. "You've taken leave of your senses, woman. But I'm prepared to help. I'll take that creature off your hands, and I'll give you a fair price for this land. You could go back east, start fresh. My land is not for sale. Everything's for sale. Clara, it's just a matter of price. Get off my property." Clara's voice was quiet now, dangerous. Morrison took a step forward, and suddenly Samuel was there, materialized from wherever he'd been working. He said nothing, just stood slightly behind and to the side of Clara, the hammer in his hand catching the sunlight. The Harmon brothers reached for their guns, but McKenna barked, "Hold!" The sheriff looked between Clara and Samuel, something shifting in his expression. "The ladies asked you to leave. Morrison, I suggest we do that." Morrison's face flushed red. "You're taking her side with that?" "I'm taking the law's side," McKenna interrupted. "And the law says a person's got a right to their own property. Come on, now." It took another long moment, but finally Morrison remounted. "This isn't over," he told Clara. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, don't expect help from decent folks." They rode away in a cloud of dust and threats, leaving Clara and Samuel standing in the garden. Her legs felt weak suddenly, and she might have fallen if he hadn't steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You stand for me," he said simply. "I stand for you." That night, Clara couldn't bring herself to send him back to the barn. "There's a room," she said hesitantly. "Off the kitchen. It was meant for—" "Well, it's empty. You'd be closer if—" She trailed off, flustered. Samuel understood. That night, for the first time since Jacob died, Clara slept knowing someone else was under her roof, someone who would stand between her and whatever darkness might come calling, and in his small room. Samuel Tallbear lay awake, listening to the night sounds of this strange new place that was beginning to feel less strange. He thought of the woman who'd looked at him and seen a man worth saving, and made a silent vow that her faith would not be misplaced. The journey from town had been silent save for the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves on hard-packed earth. Clara stole glances at the man riding beside her, trying to read something, anything, in his stoic expression. Samuel Tallbear sat the borrowed mare as if born to it, his back straight despite the ordeal he'd endured, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with the watchfulness of someone who had learned that danger could come from any direction. As they descended into a shallow valley, Clara noticed how he shifted slightly in the saddle, favoring his left side. The movement was subtle, but she'd learned to read such signs in the years of nursing Jacob through various injuries that came with ranch work. "We'll stop at the creek," she said, pointing to a line of cottonwoods ahead. "Let the horses drink." He nodded, and she thought she saw relief flicker across his features. At the creek, Clara watched him dismount carefully, each movement deliberate and controlled. When he knelt by the water's edge, she expected him to use the tin cup tied to his saddle. Instead, he cupped the clear water in both palms, lifting it to his lips with a reverence that made her breath catch. The simple act held a ceremonial quality, as if he were greeting the land itself. Water dripped from his fingers as he drank deeply, and when he finally looked up, he found her watching. Their eyes met across the small distance, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The water's good here," she said unnecessarily, "fed by mountain snow." He nodded slowly, then surprised her by speaking. "Water knows," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Clean heart, clean water." It was the first time she'd heard him speak beyond the simple "thank you" at her house. His English was accented but clear, each word carefully chosen. "You speak English well," Clara observed. Settling herself on a fallen log, a shadow crossed his face. "Mission school," he said shortly, then added with bitter irony, "They say, make us civilized." The pain in those words made Clara's chest tight. She wanted to say something comforting, but realized how hollow any such words would be. Instead, she asked, "What should I call you? I mean," she gestured helplessly, "I don't even know your name." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Samuel. They give me Samuel at mission. But my people," he touched his chest. "Tall Bear. Samuel Tall Bear." Clara repeated softly. The name felt right on her tongue, substantial and dignified. He studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You are not afraid." It wasn't a question, but Clara considered it anyway. "Should I be?" "Others fear, always fear." He gestured toward town. "They see savage. You see," he paused, searching for words. "You see man." "Yes," Clara said simply. "I see a man." Something shifted in his expression then, a softening around the eyes that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He turned back to the creek, and she saw him wince as he shifted position. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. He shrugged, a gesture that clearly cost him. "Let me see." For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then, slowly, he pulled aside his torn shirt. Clara bit back a gasp. His ribs were mottled with bruises, purple and yellow and green. And there were older scars crisscrossing his back like a map of past cruelties. "Who did this?" she asked, though she could guess. The good citizens of Dry Creek weren't known for their gentle handling of prisoners. "Does not matter," he said, pulling his shirt back into place. "Is done." "It matters to me," Clara said fiercely. He looked at her then with something like wonder. "Strange woman," he murmured. "Buy man like horse. Worry for his pain." "I didn't buy a man," Clara corrected firmly. "I bought your freedom. There's a difference." They mounted up again and continued toward the ranch. As they rode, Clara found herself talking about the land, the weather, anything to fill the silence that seemed weighted with too many unspoken things. "That ridge there marks the western boundary," she said, pointing. "Or it used to. I had to sell that section last year to pay taxes. And that grove of oaks? That's where Jacob proposed to me. He said..." Her voice caught. "He said we'd build our house where we could see those trees from the kitchen window." Samuel listened without comment, but she could feel his attention like a physical thing. It had been so long since anyone had really listened to her. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Clara felt the familiar mixture of pride and shame. In the afternoon light, every flaw was visible. The sagging fence lines, the barn's patched roof, the garden overrun with weeds. "It's not much," she said defensively. "And it needs work. More work than one person can manage." Samuel surveyed the property with those sharp eyes, taking in every detail. Then he nodded once, decisively. "Good bones," he said. "Land wants to live. Just needs..." He made a gesture with his hands, a flowering motion. "Care?" Clara suggested. "Yes, care." They rode down to the house in companionable silence. As they approached the front gate, or what remained of it, Samuel suddenly tensed. His hand moved instinctively to his side. where a weapon might have hung. "What is it?" Clara asked, alarmed. He pointed to tracks in the dust. "3 horses. Recent. Maybe 1 hour." Clara's heart sank. "Visitors," she said grimly. "I can guess who." Sure enough, as they rounded the barn, 3 horses stood tethered to the porch rail. Their riders lounged on her front steps like they owned the place. Clara recognized them immediately. Dale Morrison and 2 of his hands. "Afternoon, Clara," Morrison said, standing with false courtesy. He was a big man, prosperous and powerful, with cold gray eyes that had always made her uncomfortable. "We were starting to worry. You've been gone a long time." "Not long enough, apparently," Clara muttered under her breath. Louder, she said, "Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Morrison's eyes fixed on Samuel, and his expression hardened. "Heard about your purchase in town. Came to make sure you hadn't lost your mind entirely." "My mind is perfectly sound. Thank you." "Is it?" Morrison stepped off the porch, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Because only a woman who'd taken leave of her senses would bring a savage onto her property." Samuel had dismounted and stood perfectly still, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. "His name is Samuel," Clara said coldly, "and he's here to help with the ranch work. Unless you're offering to fix my fences and mend my roof, I'll thank you to mind your own business." Morrison's face flushed. "Now see here, Clara, I've been patient with you, offered to buy this place at a fair price more than once. But if you're going to endanger yourself and the whole community with your foolishness—" "The only danger here," Clara interrupted, "is from uninvited guests who seem to think they have a say in how I run my property." One of Morrison's men snickered. "Ain't natural. A white woman taking up with a savage. People are talking, ma'am, saying things that ain't fit for Christian ears." Clara's temper finally snapped. Then perhaps they should spend less time gossiping and more time reading their Bibles, particularly the parts about loving thy neighbor and judge not lest ye be judged. Morrison stepped closer, and suddenly Samuel was there, placing himself between Clara and the bigger man. He said nothing, but his presence spoke volumes. "You threatening me, boy?" Morrison snarled. Samuel remained silent, but he didn't back down. "That's enough." Clara moved around Samuel to face Morrison directly. "You need to leave, now. This ain't over," Morrison warned. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, you'll come begging for help. And maybe I'll give it, if you're willing to be reasonable about selling. Get off my land." Morrison and his men mounted up, but before riding off, he turned back. "You're making a mistake, Clara. A dangerous one. Don't say you weren't warned." After they'd gone, Clara found herself shaking. Samuel guided her to the porch steps and gently pressed her to sit. Then he went to the well, drew fresh water, and brought her a cup. "Thank you," she managed, wrapping her hands around the tin cup to still their trembling. He crouched before her, his dark eyes concerned. "This, because of me, trouble goes." "No!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "No," she repeated more softly. "The trouble was here long before you. Morrison's been circling like a vulture ever since Jacob died. You're just his latest excuse." Samuel considered this, then asked, "Why you do this? Buy freedom for stranger?" Clara looked down at her hands, trying to find words for something she didn't fully understand herself. "When I saw you there, in chains, being sold like property, I thought about how Jacob died. He was sick for 3 days, fever. Nothing I could do but watch him fade away. I couldn't save him." She met Samuel's eyes. "But I could save you. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said simply, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara stood. "Come on, let me show you where you'll sleep, and then we'll see about some supper. And Samuel?" She waited until he looked at her. "Tomorrow, we start fixing this place up. Together." He nodded, and for the first time since she'd seen him in chains, something that might have been hope flickered in his eyes. That evening, As Clara prepared a simple meal and Samuel tended to the horses, she realized the ranch didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The shadows seemed less threatening, the silence less oppressive. It was a small change, but after 3 years of grieving, even small changes felt momentous. At her kitchen table, she watched him eat with careful precision, noticed how he savored each bite as if remembering leaner times. When their eyes met across the table, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. "We'll go to town tomorrow for supplies," Clara said. "I'll need to make a list. Tools, mainly, nails, maybe some lumber if—" She trailed off, remembering her empty purse. Samuel reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. It was a small leather pouch, and when Clara opened it, she found several silver coins. "Where did you—" "Before jail," he said. "Hidden. They not find. I can't take your money." He pushed the pouch toward her. "For ranch. For us." Us. The simple word lodged in Clara's chest like a warm ember. She nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, as she prepared for bed, Clara paused at her window. In the barn, a soft light glowed. Samuel had lit the lantern she'd left for him. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone on the ranch. For the first time in 3 years, tomorrow felt like something to look forward to rather than simply endure. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Clara emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. She found Samuel already at work, splitting wood behind the barn with smooth, efficient strokes. His shirt hung on a nearby post, and she could see the muscles in his back working beneath bronze skin still marked by fading bruises. "You're up early," she said, offering him one of the cups. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Today, we fix fence?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward the pasture where several posts leaned at dangerous angles. "That would be good," Clara agreed. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much help with the heavy work. Jacob always—" She trailed off, as she often did when memories ambushed her. Samuel studied her thoughtfully. "You know other things. Garden, chickens, house." He gestured around them. "Takes 2 kinds of strength." It was more words than he usually strung together, and Clara found herself blinking back unexpected tears at his understanding. They worked side by side through the morning, Samuel digging post holes while Clara held the new posts steady. She was surprised to find that they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs without much talk. When the sun climbed high and the heat became oppressive, they took shelter in the shade of the barn. Clara had brought water and some cold biscuits from breakfast. As they ate, she watched a hawk circling lazily overhead. "My father would have liked this land," Samuel said suddenly. "He say, land that grows sage and cedar has strong spirit. Is he still living?" Clara asked carefully. Samuel's face closed off slightly. "Gone. Many winters now. Soldiers came to our village, said we must move. Father said no. The land was sacred, where our ancestors lay." He was quiet for a long moment. "Soldiers not like no." Clara reached out instinctively, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. "I'm sorry." He looked down at her pale hand on his darker one, something unreadable in his expression. "You have soft heart," he said quietly. "Dangerous. In hard world." "Perhaps," Clara admitted. "But I'd rather have a soft heart than a hard one." They returned to work, and by late afternoon, a good section of fence stood straight and strong. Clara couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she surveyed their progress. It had been so long since anything on the ranch had improved rather than deteriorated. As they gathered the tools, Samuel suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the road. Clara followed his gaze and saw a rider approaching, young Tom Bradley from town. "Mrs. Whitford," Tom called out as he drew near. "I've got something for you." He dismounted, glancing nervously at Samuel, but managed a polite nod. Clara appreciated the gesture. It was more courtesy than most in town would show. "What is it, Tom?" The young man pulled a letter from his jacket. "This came on the stage yesterday. My PA said to bring it out to you." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "There's talk in town. Ma'am, Morrison's been stirring folks up, saying saying things that ain't true. Some of the men are getting worked up about it." Clara's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. Just be careful, is all." Tom mounted up again, tipping his hat. "Good day to you, ma'am, sir." After he'd gone, Clara looked at the letter with trepidation. The return address was from Chicago, her sister Margaret. With trembling fingers, she opened it and read, "Dearest Clara, word has reached us of your recent actions. I cannot express how shocked and dismayed we are to hear that you have taken a savage into your home. Have you completely lost your senses? Mother is beside herself with worry. I implore you to reconsider this madness. Sell the ranch and come home where you belong. You cannot continue this unnatural existence, playing at being a man and now consorting with heathens. Think of Jacob's memory, if nothing else. What would he say? Your loving sister." Margaret Clara crumpled the letter in her fist, her chest heaving with suppressed anger. Samuel watched her quietly, not asking but clearly concerned. "My sister," she said bitterly. "Apparently news travels fast. She thinks I should sell the ranch and return to Chicago where I can be a proper widow, wearing black and pouring tea for the rest of my days. You want this? No!" The word exploded from her. "This is my home. Jacob and I built this life together, and I won't abandon it just because—" She gestured helplessly. "Because it's hard, because I'm alone, because people disapprove of my choices." "Not alone now," Samuel said quietly. Clara looked at him, standing there with dirt on his hands from their shared labor, sweat on his brow from working her land, and felt something shift inside her chest. "No," she agreed softly. "Not alone." That evening, as they ate supper, Clara found herself talking about Jacob, not with the usual weight of grief, but with something closer to fondness. "He was terrible with chickens," she said, smiling at the memory. "They'd scatter every time he came near the coop. He'd curse and stomp around, which only made it worse. But horses? He could gentle the wildest horse with just his voice and hands." Samuel listened, occasionally asking a question that showed he was paying attention. When Clara asked about his own life before, he spoke haltingly of learning to track with his grandfather, of ceremonies by firelight, of a world that seemed to grow smaller each year as more settlers arrived. "You're English," Clara said. "You speak it well, but you said the mission school." His face darkened. 3 years at mission, they take us from families, cut hair, forbid our language, beat us if we speak it." He touched his chest. "They try to kill the Indian, save the man, but cannot kill what lives here." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Don't let them." As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Morning coffee as the sun rose. Work through the heat of the day, Samuel handling the heavy labor while Clara tended the garden and animals. Evenings spent in quiet companionship, sometimes talking, often just sitting in comfortable silence. The change in the ranch was remarkable. Fences stood straight. The barn door no longer hung crooked. The garden, freed from weeds and properly watered, began to show signs of life. Even the chickens seemed more productive, as if responding to the renewed energy of the place. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the garden, she heard Samuel's voice from the barn, singing. She realized with surprise the words were in his own language, the melody unlike anything she'd ever heard. She stood transfixed, trowel forgotten in her hand, as the haunting sound washed over her. When the song ended, she found him watching her from the barn door. "That was beautiful," she said. "What was it?" "Song for the horses," he said, seeming almost embarrassed. "My grandfather's song makes them calm." "Would you teach me?" He looked surprised. "You want to learn?" "Yes." So began Clara's lessons in Samuel's language. Simple words at first: water, sky, earth. He was a patient teacher. correcting her pronunciation with gentle humor. In return, she helped him with reading, having discovered he could speak English far better than he could read it. One evening, 2 weeks after Samuel's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The ranch looked better than it had in years, and Clara felt a contentment she'd thought lost forever. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Samuel looked at her questioningly. "For staying, for working, for—" She gestured at the improved ranch. "All of this, I couldn't have done it alone." "You give me freedom," he said simply. "I give you my hands, my strength, fair trade. Is that all it is? A trade?" He was quiet for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "No, not just trade." He seemed to struggle for words. "You see me as man. Not savage, not less than just man. This is gift greater than freedom." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Without thinking, she reached over and took his hand. His fingers, calloused from work, closed gently around hers. They sat that way as the stars emerged. Two people who had found in each other something they hadn't known they were looking for. The world beyond the ranch might disapprove, might threaten, might condemn, but here, in this moment, they had created something precious, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared labor, and the gradual blossoming of trust. When Clara finally went inside, she paused at her bedroom window to look out at the barn. The soft glow of Samuel's lantern was visible through the cracks in the wood. Tomorrow would bring more work, and likely more challenges from those who couldn't understand what they were building together. But tonight, Clara felt hope. For the first time since Jacob's death, the ranch felt like home again. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Tallbear was discovering what it meant to be seen not as a savage to be feared or a problem to be solved, but simply as a man, one worthy of respect, kindness, and perhaps something more. The sound of approaching horses woke Clara from uneasy sleep. She'd been dreading this moment for days, ever since Tom Bradley's warning. Through her window, she could see torches flickering in the pre-dawn darkness. 5, maybe 6 riders making their way up the path to her house. She dressed quickly, hands steady despite her racing heart. Jacob's shotgun stood ready by the door where she'd placed it each night since Samuel's arrival. As she reached for it, she heard movement from the small room off the kitchen. Samuel emerged, fully dressed, his face grave. "Stay inside," Clara said firmly. "This is my fight." "No." His voice brooked no argument. "We stand together." Before she could protest, the riders were in her yard. Clara recognized them even in the dim light. The Harmon brothers. Jim and Pete, both known for their drinking and quick tempers. Dale Morrison's foreman. Ray Hutchins. 2 others she didn't know well. Rough men who worked the cattle drives. And at their head, not Morrison himself, but Reverend Blackwood from the church in town. "Mrs. Whitford," the Reverend called out, his voice carrying that particular brand of righteousness that had always set Clara's teeth on edge. "We've come to talk sense to you." Clara stepped onto the porch, shotgun visible but not raised. Samuel followed, standing slightly behind her left shoulder. "Strange hour for a social call, Reverend," Clara said coolly. "Desperate times call for desperate measures." Blackwood dismounted, his black coat making him look like a crow in the torchlight. "This situation has gone on long enough. You're living in sin with a heathen, bringing shame upon yourself and danger to our community." "I'm doing nothing of the sort," Clara replied. "Mr. Tallbear works for me. He sleeps in the barn. We've broken no laws." Jim Harmon spat tobacco juice near her porch steps. "Don't matter where he sleeps. Ain't natural, a white woman taking up with a savage. Watch your mouth on my property," Clara warned. "Or what?" Pete Harmon sneered. "You'll have your pet Indian scalp us?" Samuel stepped forward then, and even in the flickering torchlight, there was something in his bearing that made the men shift nervously in their saddles. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement. "See?" Blackwood pointed dramatically. He threatens good Christian men. This is what comes of defying God's natural order.